On Mother's Day, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, canceled my seat at her table. She did more than that. She announced to her own mother, loud enough for me to overhear, that the real gift would be when that witch, meaning me, finally ends up in a nursing home. So, on Monday, I canceled the check for her mortgage. I am glad you are here. Follow my story until the end, and please comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story of mine has reached. It all started on the Saturday before that fateful Mother's Day. I stood in my sun-drenched kitchen, carefully arranging delicate, blush pink roses in a crystal vase. It was a special vase, one I had saved from my own wedding registry, and I only brought it out for moments I hoped would be memorable. This was my gift for Vanessa. The brilliant morning sunlight streamed through the clean window panes, catching the polished surface of the fine hand-painted teacup set I had also bought for her. It was a terrible splurge, an extravagance I knew I couldn't really afford on my fixed income. But the desire to please her, to win her over, was a powerful and persistent ache in my chest. I am 60 years old, and despite everything, I still believed in the power of trying. It's a foolish sort of optimism, perhaps, but it was all I had. I still held on to the hope that if I just found the perfect gift, or said the exact right words, the invisible wall that stood between Vanessa and me might finally begin to crumble. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet morning. It was Andrew, my son. A surge of warmth and love lifted my heart, just as it always did when he called. I wiped my hands on the front of my floral apron and reached for the phone, a smile already on my face. "Mom?" His voice sounded tight, strained in a way that immediately put me on edge. "About tomorrow." Something in his tone, a thin wire of anxiety, made my fingers tighten on the cool edge of the counter. My smile faltered. "What about it, hun? I've got Vanessa's gift all ready to go, and I spent yesterday making those lemon sugar cookies the kids love so much." A heavy, crackling silence stretched between our two homes, thick with words unsaid. I could almost picture him on the other end, running a hand through his hair. "That's just it, Mom," he finally said. "Vanessa, she thought it might be easier to just keep it small this year. You know, family only." My hand, which had been reaching to adjust a rose, froze in midair. The words felt like a slap. "But Andrew," I said slowly, my voice barely a whisper, "I am family. You know what I mean, Mom." His voice dropped even lower, taking on a pleading quality that I knew was meant to disarm me, to make me back down. "Just us and the kids. It's simple." The excuse felt flimsy, transparent, and a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. There was more to it. There was always more. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my own voice light. "Well, whose parents are coming then?" I meant it as a small joke, a way to poke a hole in his ridiculous excuse. The silence that followed was my answer. Then he said it. "Vanessa's parents are coming too." The vibrant pink roses blurred before my eyes, their soft edges dissolving into a watery haze. "Her parents?" "Yeah, they're staying for the whole weekend." I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat, fighting with every ounce of my will to keep my voice steady and free of the tremor I felt in my chest. "I see," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Well, that's fine. I could just drop by for a few minutes. I won't stay long, I promise. I just want to give Vanessa her gifts and see the children." "Mom, please don't make this difficult." The frustration in his voice was no longer hidden. It cut through me like a shard of glass. "Vanessa has been really stressed lately, with the house renovations and everything." The house renovations. The house I had helped them buy with a gift that drained my savings. The very house whose mortgage I had been quietly paying for them, ever since Andrew lost his job at Innovatech Solutions last year. The mortgage that was siphoning my retirement fund, month after painstaking month. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I was paying for the walls that were now shutting me out. "I understand," I said, even though I didn't. Not really. It was a lie I told to protect my son from my own pain, and perhaps to protect myself from the full, crushing weight of the truth. After we hung up, I just stood there, staring at the beautiful roses I had arranged with so much hope only moments before. All my life I had believed that families stick together, that love meant sacrifice, no matter what. That simple, bedrock belief had been my compass after my husband Thomas died, leaving me alone with a 12-year-old son to raise. It had guided me through the hardest days. Now that compass was spinning wildly, its needle unable to find north. I picked up my car keys from the hook by the door. I wouldn't listen. I would drive by their house, just to drop off the gifts on the porch. That's all. I wouldn't even go inside. What harm could that possibly do? 20 minutes later, I pulled my car up to their 2-story colonial, the house that held my heart, my son, and my grandchildren. It was quiet, with no sign of anyone. Maybe they were out shopping for the big celebration tomorrow. I was about to get out, to leave the gift bag and the cookies on the welcome mat, when I heard Vanessa's voice. It was clear and sharp, drifting through an open living room window. "No, Mom. Don't worry about her showing up." Vanessa's laugh was a cold, brittle thing. I made sure Andrew told her to stay away. I froze, my hand on the car door handle, the gift bag clutched to my chest. "She's not invited this year." A pause. "Or any year, if I have my way." I should have started the car. I should have driven away and never looked back, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor of the car, my body rooted to the spot by a horrified disbelief. "You know what would be a real Mother's Day present?" Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with a contempt so profound it made me feel sick. "When that old Megara finally goes into a nursing home. Now that would be a cause for celebration." The gift bag slipped from my numb fingers, landing on the pavement with a sickening crash. The delicate hand-painted teacup set shattered on the concrete. I barely registered the sound. I barely felt the sharp sting as a shard of porcelain cut my finger when I instinctively bent to pick up the pieces. That old Megara, my daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, saw me as a malevolent spirit, a burden to be discarded. I drove home in a complete daze, tears blurring the road into a kaleidoscope of meaningless shapes and colors. Once inside my own small, quiet house, I collapsed onto my sofa, the weight of Vanessa's vicious words crushing the very air from my lungs. For years I had been a master of self-deception, making endless excuses for Vanessa's behavior. "Oh, she's under a lot of stress with her career." I would tell myself, "She comes from a different generation, one that doesn't value family in the same way. She just needs more time to warm up to me." I had swallowed her snide remarks at family gatherings, pretending they were jokes I didn't quite get. I had learned to ignore the subtle, yet deliberate way she would angle her phone to leave me out of family photos. All the while I had been the silent, steady benefactor in the background. I was the one helping them financially, paying that enormous mortgage every month, contributing generously to my grandchildren's college funds, and consistently going without so that they could have more things, more security, a better life. My gaze, blurry with unshed tears, drifted across the living room and fell on my checkbook, which was sitting on the polished cherry wood of the coffee table. It was open to the next check in the sequence. The mortgage payment for their beautiful colonial house was due next week. I had, with the dutiful precision that governed my life, already written the check. It was waiting in a stamped envelope, ready to be mailed out on Monday morning. I reached for it, my hand trembling. I stared at the tidy script, "Pay to the order of Meridian Trust Bank," and then the amount. It was a staggering sum, nearly half of my entire monthly income, a constant and heavy drain on the retirement savings Thomas and I had worked so hard to build. With trembling fingers, I took the check out of the envelope. I looked at my own signature, Clara Morgan, written so neatly at the bottom, the signature of a woman who had allowed herself to become a doormat, the signature of a fool. A quiet, cold fury began to replace the crushing sorrow in my chest. It was a slow burn, starting in my gut and spreading through my veins, chasing away the chill of despair. I held the check with both hands, and with a single, decisive motion, I tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was louder than a gunshot in the silent room. It was the sound of a chain breaking. I tore the 2 halves into 4, and the 4 into 8, until the pieces were nothing but confetti in my lap. Then, I picked up the phone again. I dialed the number for Meridian Trust Bank from memory. I put a stop payment order on that specific check, and then I went a step further. I'd like to cancel a recurring payment, I said, my voice surprisingly strong and clear. Certainly, ma'am. Can you tell me the name of the payee? The polite young man on the other end asked. It's for a mortgage account. The payment goes to you, Meridian Trust Bank. I gave him the account number, the one I knew as well as my own birthday. Okay, I see it here, the representative said. A monthly payment of $2,100. Are you sure you wish to cancel this, Mrs. Morgan? This is a recurring payment you've been making without fail for over a year now. His question was standard procedure, but it hung in the air, offering me one last chance to reconsider, to shrink back into my role as the dutiful silent supporter, to choose the familiar pain over the terrifying unknown. I'm sure, I said, and the strength in my voice surprised even me. I am absolutely sure. That payment stops today. When I hung up the phone, I noticed for the first time that my hands had stopped shaking. A deep, shuddering breath filled my lungs. The first I felt I had truly taken in months. It was as if I had been underwater and had finally broken the surface. I could breathe freely. Tomorrow was Mother's Day, and yes, I would spend it alone. There would be no brunch, no gifts, no smiling photos with my grandchildren, Mia and Noah. But it would also be the first day of my new life. It would be the day I started living for myself. It would be a life where I would no longer be expected to sacrifice my dignity for people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, a burden to be tolerated, until she could be conveniently stored away. I looked around my small, cozy living room, my eyes lingering on the framed photos of Andrew and the kids. What was going to happen now? The reality of my decision began to set in. Once Vanessa realized the money spigot had been turned off, would she forbid me from seeing my grandchildren altogether? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp blade twisting in my heart. They were my world. But then, another voice rose from deep within me. It was a voice I hadn't heard in a very long time, a voice that sounded like my own. It was stronger and clearer than the fear. What kind of example are you setting for Mia and Noah if you allow yourself to be treated this way? Do you want them to learn that love means erasing yourself for someone else's comfort? The phone rang, its shrill cry tearing through the newfound quiet. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Andrew. It was too soon, of course, for him to know about the canceled check. Vanessa must have seen me outside their house. She must have seen the shattered gift, and was now sending my son to manage the situation, to smooth over my hurt feelings so their life could continue undisturbed. I looked at the screen, at the name of the boy I had raised, the man I loved more than life itself, and for the first time ever, I let it ring. 3 days passed in a heavy, ringing silence. 3 days of me jumping whenever my phone rang, my heart leaping into my throat only to sink when it was a telemarketer or my friend Barbara calling to chat. So I spent those 3 days rehearsing what I would say when Andrew finally called, my imaginary speeches veering wildly from righteous anger to tearful pleading. With every hour that passed, a new wave of doubt would wash over me. Had I been too rash? Had I overreacted? Had I just destroyed the most important relationship in my life over a few carelessly cruel words? To keep my hands and mind occupied, I decided to tackle the cluttered closet in the spare bedroom. I pulled out dusty boxes filled with old photo albums, their padded covers faded with time. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my own past. There was Andrew at 7 years old, missing his 2 front teeth and beaming with pride, as he held up a small, silvery fish he'd caught with his father. Thomas stood behind him, one hand on Andrew's shoulder, his face lit with that easy, loving smile I missed every single day. Thomas's death from a sudden, massive heart attack just 3 years after that photo was taken had completely shattered our world. It left me a 35-year-old widow with a grieving, bewildered child and a mountain of unexpected debt. I traced the outline of Thomas's handsome face in the photograph, a familiar ache blooming in my chest. I did everything I could, my love, I whispered to him across the year. I kept our boy safe. And I had. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, and food on the table. I was an administrative assistant by day, a harried waitress by night. I remembered helping Andrew with his algebra homework between shifts, my apron still smelling of coffee and fried onions. I attended every single school play, every parent-teacher conference, every baseball game, even when it meant sacrificing precious hours of sleep. I was determined that my son would not suffer for being raised by a single working mother. When it came time for college, I took out a second mortgage on our small house, the house Thomas and I had bought together, to pay for his education. I never even considered remarrying, though there had been a few opportunities. My life revolved entirely around Andrew, around giving him the future that Thomas and I had always dreamed of for him. When he met Vanessa during his senior year of college, I was genuinely thrilled for him. She was ambitious and fiercely confident, a business major with a 5-year plan. She had a certain polish that I thought would be good for Andrew. What I didn't realize at the time was that her 5-year plan had always included my money. But it had never included me. The wedding was the first real sign, the first major crack in my hopeful facade. Vanessa insisted on a lavish, extravagant affair at an expensive downtown venue with a guest list that seemed to grow by the day. When I gently suggested that perhaps something more modest might be more practical, she'd looked at me with a thinly veiled contempt that made me feel small and hopelessly out of touch. "This is our special day, Clara," she'd said, her voice syrupy sweet, but with an edge of steel. "We want it to be perfect. Don't you want that for your son?" Of course I did. What mother doesn't? So I withdrew a substantial amount of money from my 401k, incurring penalties I knew I couldn't truly afford, just to give them the wedding of Vanessa's dream. After they were married, the distance between us grew. Andrew's calls became less frequent. Invitations to dinner, which had once been a weekly affair, became rare occasions. When I did visit, Vanessa would always find a reason to cut the visit short. She would suddenly develop a splitting headache, or the kids were overtired and needed to get to bed, or they had plans they'd completely forgotten about. Yet, whenever they found themselves in a financial bind, suddenly I was family again. The distance would vanish, and my phone would ring. 3 years ago, when they decided they wanted to buy the Colonial in that upscale neighborhood, Andrew had come to me, his eyes downcast. "The bank won't approve us for the full amount," he'd admitted, staring at his shoes. "But it's the perfect house, Mom. It's in the best school district for Mia and Noah." I couldn't bear to see him so defeated, so I'd offered to help with the down payment, draining the last of my liquid savings to do it. But then, Andrew lost his job in a round of downsizing at Innovatech Solutions, and they couldn't make the mortgage payments. Vanessa flatly refused to even consider moving to a more affordable house. That's when I started paying their mortgage. It was meant to be a temporary measure to get them through a rough patch. Somehow it had become permanent. The shrill ring of the phone startled me from my memories. I looked down at the screen. Andrew. This time I knew I had to answer. I took a deep breath and pressed the green icon. "Where's the mortgage payment?" There was no greeting. "No. How are you, Mom?" Just raw, unfiltered anger. "Hello to you too, Andrew," I said, my voice much calmer than I felt. "Mom, Meridian Trust Bank called. They said the payment is past due." "What's going on?" I took another slow, fortifying breath. This was it. The point of no return. "I'm not making the payment anymore, Andrew." "What?" His voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "You can't do that." "Actually, I can," I replied softly. "It's my money." "But we had an agreement. You said you'd help us." "That was before," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "That was before I heard what Vanessa really thinks of me. Before I found out I was uninvited from Mother's Day, while her parents were welcome to stay for the entire weekend. Before I heard your wife tell her own mother that me going to a nursing home would be a real cause for celebration." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, his voice thick with accusation. "So you were spying on us?" The accusation stung, a sharp and unfair blow that landed on top of an already bruised heart. "No, Andrew, I was not spying," I said, my voice sharp with indignation. "I came to your house to drop off gifts for you and Vanessa and the children. Your wife was talking so loudly with the window wide open that the entire neighborhood could probably hear her." "I didn't have to spy," she announced her feelings to the world. He was silent for a moment. "She didn't mean it," he finally mumbled, but his voice completely lacked conviction. It was the weak defense of a man who knew he was cornered by an indefensible truth. I challenged, a wave of righteous anger rising in me. What was it she was just venting about, Andrew? What exactly have I ever done to her to deserve that kind of hatred? What have I ever done to either of you, except give, and give, and give until there is almost nothing left for me? Another heavy silence stretched between us. I could almost see him in my mind's eye pacing his kitchen floor, running a hand through his thick hair, a gesture so like his father's that it sent a fresh pang of grief through me. He was stressed, caught between two women, but my sympathy was wearing thin. "Mom, we need that money," he finally said, his voice low and desperate. The pivot was so abrupt, so telling. All my pain, all the years of disrespect were secondary to the cash flow. "We can't make the payment without it." "Then sell the house, Andrew," I said, surprised at the firmness in my own voice. "Get something you can actually afford. Live within your means." "We can't do that now," he sounded genuinely panicked. "The market's down. We'd lose money. And what about the kids' school? We bought this house for their school district. Those are your choices to make, Andrew," I said, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. "You and Vanessa, but I will not be paying for them anymore." His voice turned cold, dropping the panicked tone for one of icy fury. "Is this blackmail? You're using money to punish us because your feelings got hurt." Something inside me, some final resilient thread of hope that my son still saw me as his mother instead of his banker, finally snapped. All the years of sacrifice, of putting his needs before my own, of loving him so fiercely it sometimes felt like my heart would burst. All of it came crashing down under the weight of that one cruel question. He thought I was being petty. "This isn't about punishment, Andrew," I said, my voice trembling but holding steady. "This is about respect. It's a word I don't think you or your wife understand anymore." The dam broke, and the words I had held back for years began to flow. "I have spent my entire life since the day you were born putting you first. When your father died, I worked myself to the bone to make sure you had everything you needed. I went without so that you could have. I am 60 years old, Andrew, with barely enough saved for my own retirement, because I gave everything I had to you. And in return, you stand by silently and let your wife treat me like I'm a piece of garbage she can't wait to throw out. That's not fair, is it?" "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not fair. No, none of this is fair," I agreed, gathering the last of my strength. "But I'm done. I am done being the villain in your story when all I have ever been is your biggest supporter. I love you, Andrew. I always will. But I won't set myself on fire to keep you and Vanessa warm anymore." I hung up the phone before he could respond, before my own resolve could crumble into a million pieces. My hand flew to my mouth and a sob I hadn't realized I was holding back escaped. I stood there, trembling, in the middle of my silent living room, outside my window. The spring flowers were blooming in my small garden. I had planted those tulip and daffodil bulbs in the cold, hard ground of the fall, an act of blind faith that I would still be here to see them flower. Now their vibrant colors, bold yellows, deep reds, soft pinks, seemed like a sign. Life continues. Beauty can emerge even after the harshest, longest winter. My phone buzzed on the table where I'd left it. It was a text message from Andrew. "We need to talk about this in person. I'm coming over tomorrow." I looked at the message, at the demand disguised as a request. I set the phone down on the table without replying. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and he would come to my house. But this time, the conversation would be on my terms. For now, I walked outside into the fresh air of my garden and began pulling weeds, my hands working in the rich, dark soil. It was long past time to tend to my own life for a change. It was time to see what might bloom if I finally redirected all that care and attention toward myself. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 a.m. the next morning, as if on a timer. I had been up since dawn, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach, making sleep impossible. I had spent the early morning hours pacing my small living room, rehearsing all the things I wanted to say to Andrew, only to discard each speech as either too angry or too weak. Finally, I gave up, simply steeling myself for whatever was to come. I smoothed my hands over the front of my favorite blue cardigan for the 10th time and walked to the door. Andrew stood on my porch, his face drawn and tight with tension. He looked older, somehow, the lines around his eyes etched deeper than I remembered from just a few weeks ago. The easy smile that had always reminded me so much of his father was gone, replaced by a grim, resolute mask. "Come in," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I stepped aside to let him pass. He walked past me without a word, his shoulders rigid, not even making eye contact. He carried the chill of the morning in with him. In the living room, he remained standing, jamming his hands deep into the pockets of his jacket, looking more like an intruder than a son. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, reaching for the familiar comfort of normal hospitality in this decidedly abnormal situation. "I just made a fresh pot." "I'm not here for coffee, Mom," he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "I'm here about the mortgage." Of course, not to check on me, not to see if I was okay after our explosive conversation, and certainly not to apologize for his wife's cruelty or for excluding me from Mother's Day. Just the money. The confirmation sent a fresh wave of weary sadness through me, but it also solidified my resolve. I sat down on the sofa, feeling suddenly bone-weary. "Sit down, Andrew, please." He hesitated for a moment, then perched reluctantly on the very edge of the armchair across from me, like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. "The bank called again yesterday," he began, getting straight to his point. "If we miss another payment, they're going to start foreclosure proceedings." "I told you my decision, Andrew," I said quietly. "I'm not paying for the house anymore because of some stupid comment Vanessa made." He ran his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "She was just having a bad day. You know how she gets." "This isn't about one comment, Andrew," I said, my voice gaining strength. "This is about years of disrespect. It is about years of being treated like a walking, talking ATM rather than a mother." "That's not fair," he started to say, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Isn't it?" I leaned over and opened the small drawer of the side table next to me. I pulled out a small, spiral-bound notebook. It was plain, unassuming, the kind you buy at a grocery store. "Do you know what this is?" He stared at it, a confused frown on his face. "It's a ledger," I explained, my voice even. "It's a record of every significant financial gift I've given you and Vanessa since the day you got married. The down payment on your house, the money for the kitchen renovations, the monthly mortgage payment, the countless personal loans that were ever repaid." I opened the little book, its pages filled with my neat, careful script, and turned a few pages for effect. "It comes to over $300,000, Andrew. Almost everything I had saved for my retirement, everything your father and I worked our entire lives for." His face flushed a deep, mottled red. "You never said those were loans," he stammered, his defensiveness rising. "You offered to help, and you never once declined," I countered, my gaze unwavering. "You never once said, 'No, Mom, that's too much.' You never even said thank you most of the time. And all the while, your wife was making it abundantly, painfully clear how little she valued my presence in your lives." "That's not true," Andrew protested, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He was staring at the rug. "Isn't it?" I pressed on, my voice low and steady. The time for tiptoeing around his feelings was over. "Let's talk about last Christmas. Vanessa accidentally forgot to tell me that dinner had been moved up by 2 hours. I arrived, gifts in hand, to find everyone already finishing dessert. Do you remember how humiliating that was, Andrew?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That was just a misunderstanding. What about the family vacation to the beach last summer?" I continued, my voice gaining momentum. "The only reason I found out about it was because I saw the pictures you posted on ConnectSphere after you had already gone. We thought you wouldn't want to go. You told me later. You didn't even bother to ask. And your anniversary party," I said, the memories still stinging. "I was seated at a table with your work colleagues. People I had never met, as far away from the family table as possible. I felt like a stranger." "Mom, you're being dramatic." I stood up, walked to my desk, and returned with a small stack of envelopes tied with a rubber band. I set them down on the coffee table between us. "Then what are these?" "Birthday cards for Mia and Noah." Christmas check. All of them returned to me, marked with wrong address scrawled across the front. Even though, as you know, my address hasn't changed in 20 years. Andrew's face paled as he stared at the familiar envelopes. I never saw them. Of course you didn't, I said, my voice softening with a sad certainty. Vanessa made sure of that. Just like she makes sure I rarely get to see my own grandchildren. Did you know, Andrew? Did you know that the last time I saw Mia, she asked me why I don't love her anymore? She told me that's what her mommy said. That the only reason I never come around is because I don't love them. Andrew's broad shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a look of horrified comprehension. She wouldn't do that, but she did, I said, leaning forward, my heart aching for him, for me, for the grandchildren caught in the middle. Andrew, I have tried for years to build a relationship with Vanessa. I have overlooked countless slights, swallowed endless insults, and continued to support you both financially, hoping one day things would change. But I can't do it anymore. I won't. Just then the doorbell rang again, a sharp, piercing sound that made us both jump. Are you expecting someone? Andrew asked, his head snapping toward the door. I wasn't. But as I stood up, a cold, sinking feeling washed over me. I had a very good idea of who it was. I opened the door to find Vanessa standing on my porch, just as I knew I would. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. Her expression was a perfect mask of righteous indignation, as if I were the one who had committed some unforgivable sin against her. I knew he wouldn't handle this right, she said, brushing past me into the house without so much as a hello. She didn't even look at me, her eyes already scanning the room for her husband. Her expensive perfume filled the air, a cloying scent that suddenly felt suffocating in my small home. Her gaze landed on Andrew, who looked as if he wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. What's taking so long? She demanded, her voice sharp and impatient. Just get her to sign the check and let's go. The chill in the room was palpable. The words spoken with such casual cruelty hung in the air between us. She had just confirmed everything I had felt for years. I was not a person to them, not family. I was a task to be managed, a resource to be exploited. Andrew looked utterly mortified, his face turning a shade of pale gray. Vanessa, he began, his voice strained. That's not why I'm here. We were just talking. Oh, stop it, she snapped, cutting him off with a wave of her hand. She turned her full attention. Me, her chin lifted in defiance. Look, she said, adopting a tone one might use with a difficult toddler. I know you're upset about the whole Mother's Day thing, but this is childish. We need that money. It's my money, I said quietly, my voice holding a calm I didn't know I possess, and I have decided not to give it to you anymore. Vanessa's face darkened, the mask of civility slipping. After everything we've done for you, she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It wasn't a laugh of mirth, but a short, bitter bark of sound, born from years of pent-up frustration and the sheer breathtaking absurdity of her statement. What exactly have you done for me, Vanessa? I asked, my eyes locking with her. Besides, of course, taking my money and doing your absolute best to keep me away from my own son and grandchildren. I've tolerated you, she snapped, her carefully constructed veneer finally cracking. Do you have any idea how tiresome it is, having you hover around all the time? Always wanting attention, always playing the poor lonely widow card to get your way. Vanessa, that's enough, Andrew said, standing up so abruptly that the coffee table rattled. No, it's not enough, she shot back, turning her fury on him. Your mother has been napling you for years with her pathetic guilt trips. And her checkbook. Well, we don't need her. We kind of do need her checkbook right now, Vanessa, Andrew said quietly, his voice heavy with defeat. And with those 7 words, something inside my chest, something I hadn't even realized was still holding on, finally broke. My own son, admitting out loud that my only true value to him, to his family, was purely financial. Vanessa, sensing a shift in power, turned back to me. Her voice suddenly became smooth and honeyed, a predatory sweetness that was more chilling than her anger. Clara, we all say things we don't mean when we're upset. Let's just put all of this behind us. The mortgage payment is no longer my responsibility, I said, finishing the sentence she should have known was coming. And neither are you. That was it. Vanessa's entire facade crumbled into dust. The honeyed tone vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated venom. You smug, self-righteous old woman, she hissed, her face contorted with rage. Do you honestly think Andrew would even bother to visit you if you weren't paying our bills? Do you think the kids would give a damn about their grandmother if you weren't constantly bringing them expensive gifts? Andrew stared at his wife, his mouth agape with a look of genuine horror. Vanessa, stop. No, I said, a strange and powerful calm washing over me. Let her continue. Let her tell the truth for once. Vanessa let out a bitter, humorless laugh. The truth? You want the truth? The truth is that you've been buying your way into our lives for years, because you have absolutely nothing else to offer. You have no one else to burden with your bottomless neediness, and now you're throwing a childish tantrum because you finally realized that we've been using you all along. The silence that followed was absolute, thick, and suffocating. Andrew looked like he'd been physically struck. Vanessa's chest heaved with ragged, angry breaths, and I felt oddly, miraculously liberated. The worst had been said. The ugliest truth was out in the open, and the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. In fact, for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Thank you for your honesty, Vanessa, I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. Now I would like you both to leave. Mom, Andrew began, his voice pleading, but I held up my hand, a simple gesture that stopped him cold. I have heard enough, I said, my voice quiet, but unyielding. We have nothing more to discuss. Vanessa, seeing she had lost all control of the situation, grabbed her expensive handbag from the armchair. Fine, she spat. Come on, Andrew. She's made her choice. Andrew hesitated, his tall frame caught in the doorway, a man literally and figuratively torn between his wife and his mother. Vanessa's voice was a whip crack from the porch. Andrew. Now. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a storm of confusion, hurt and dawning horror. Then, he followed her out the door, but before stepping outside he turned back, his hand on the doorknob. I didn't know, Mom, he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. About the cards. About what she said to Mia. I swear. I nodded once. A small, tight acknowledgement, whether I believed him or not, in that moment, no longer seemed to matter. The fundamental structure of our relationship had been demolished, and belief was a luxury we couldn't afford. When the front door finally closed behind them, plunging my house back into silence, I sank onto the sofa. A deep tremor ran through my entire body, but it was not a tremor of sadness or fear. It was a fierce, unexpected, and utterly astonishing pride. I had weathered the ugliest storm. I had faced the most painful truths. I had finally, after 60 long years, stood my ground. The mask of my happy, perfect family had been ripped away, and now, for the first time, it was time to see what lay beneath. The weeks following that explosive confrontation passed in a strange, muted haze. I moved through my days mechanically, grocery shopping, tending to my blooming garden, watching television programs, whose plots I could barely register. The silence from my phone was deafening. There were no calls from Andrew, no photo updates of Mia and Noah, no passive-aggressive text from Vanessa about forgotten appointments or unmet needs. The silence hurt, of course it did, but it was a clean, sharp pain, so different from the dull, chronic ache of being constantly disrespected. There was a curious freedom in it, too. My days were my own. My thoughts were my own. My money was my own. I was folding laundry on a Wednesday afternoon, the scent of clean linen filling my spare room, when my doorbell rang. My heart did a familiar, anxious flip-flop. Opening it, I found Mia, my 11-year-old granddaughter, standing on my porch. Her bicycle was thrown haphazardly on the lawn behind her, as if she had abandoned it in a great hurry. Mia, I gasped. My heart clenched. I pulled her into a tight hug, feeling her small, trembling frame against mine. "Honey, what are you doing here? Does your father know where you are?" She shook her head, burying her face into my cardigan. Her eyes were brimming with tears that she was fighting hard to hold back. "Dad and Mom are fighting," she whispered into my shoulder. "All the time. About the house. And about you. I heard Dad tell Mom that the bank is going to take our house away." My own heart sank. So the consequences were beginning to land. The foreclosure proceedings had started. "Oh honey, I miss you, Grandma," Mia said, her voice muffled by my sweater. She finally looked up at me, her big, brown eyes, so much like Andrew's, searching my face. Mom said, "You didn't want to see us anymore." But I knew that wasn't true. Those words, that simple declaration of faith from a child, were a balm to my wounded soul. I led her into the kitchen, and without a word, set about making her favorite treat, hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, even though it was a warm spring day. Some situations simply required comfort food. "Your mother wasn't telling the truth," I said gently, setting the warm mug in front of her at the small kitchen table. "I have missed you and Noah terribly." Mia nodded, taking a careful sip of her cocoa. "Dad's really sad all the time," she confided. "He lost his job again last week. Mom just keeps crying about the house." So that was it. On top of everything else, Andrew had lost his new job. It was the third time in 5 years. The tech industry, for all its promise, could be brutal and unforgiving. No wonder he hadn't called. His pride must be in tatters. "Are you and Dad fighting?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with the worry that only a child whose world is shaking can have. "Is that why you're not helping with our house anymore?" I took a deep breath, considering how to explain a lifetime of adult complexities to a child. "Your dad and I had a disagreement, sweetie," I said carefully. "It was about respect, and about how family members should always treat each other with kindness." "Is it because Mom's mean to you?" Mia asked with the blunt honesty of a child. "I heard her on the phone with Aunt Susan. She said you were a controlling witch who needed to mind your own business." I nearly choked on my tea. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. It's complicated, sweetheart," I said finally. "But I need you to know that none of this is your fault, and I love you and Noah very, very much." When I called Andrew to let him know Mia was with me, his relief was so palpable I could feel it through the phone. "I'll come get her right away," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Let her stay for dinner," I suggested, a bold new instinct taking over. "I can bring her home afterward." There was a pause on his end. "Vanessa won't like that." "Vanessa doesn't have to know," I replied, surprised at my own firmness. "Mia came to me and she's worried sick about you two fighting all the time." Another, longer pause. "Okay then," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Fine, but I'll come and pick her up. I need to talk to you anyway." Andrew arrived just after 7, looking even more exhausted than he had the day before. The anger and tension that had radiated from him in our last meeting were gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that seemed to settle in his very posture. Mia ran to hug him, chattering excitedly about the chocolate chip cookies we had baked, and how I had let her help deadhead the dying roses in my garden, making way for new buds. "Go wait in the car, sweetheart," Andrew said finally, his voice gentle. "I need to talk to Grandma for a minute." When she was gone, he stood awkwardly in my living room, his hands shoved into his pockets, a near-perfect echo of his stance the day before. But everything had changed. "You lost your job," I said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Budget cuts. They laid off 20% of the staff." He finally sank into the armchair, the one he had perched on so warily before, and ran a hand over his face. "And the house. We've missed 2 payments now. Meridian Trust Bank sent a formal notice. If we don't catch up within 30 days, they'll start the foreclosure process." I said nothing. I just waited, letting the silence hang in the air. This was his story to tell, his mess to explain. I was done filling in the blanks or rushing to find solutions. "Vanessa's parents can't help," he continued, his voice heavy. "Her dad lost most of his retirement savings in some bad investment scheme last year. They're barely getting by themselves." I had never known that. Vanessa always spoke of her family as if they were pillars of financial security and good sense. The knowledge added another layer of understanding to her desperation, though it didn't excuse her cruelty. "We're going to have to sell," Andrew admitted, his voice cracking. "But like I told you, the market's down. We'll lose money. We'll probably walk away with nothing after the bank gets its share and we pay all the fees." "I'm sorry to hear that, Andrew," I said, and I truly meant it. I wasn't sorry enough to open my checkbook and erase the consequences of their choices, but I was sorry for the genuine stress and pain he was so clearly in. He nodded, then reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a crumpled white envelope. "I found these," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "in Vanessa's desk drawer. I was looking for the mortgage paperwork and, well, I found these." He handed the envelope to me. I opened the unsealed flap and tipped the contents into my hand. It was the stack of cards I had seen just yesterday. The birthday cards for Mia and Noah, the Christmas cards, all from me, all unopened. "There were more," Andrew said quietly, his eyes filled with a deep, painful shame. "Going back years. She kept them all in a box, said she was protecting the kids from my manipulative mother." My hands trembled as I looked at the colorful, cheerful envelopes, each one a small vessel of love and connection that had been deliberately intercepted and hidden away. Each one represented a moment of joy I had wanted to share with my grandchildren, stolen by their mother's bitterness. "I didn't know," Andrew whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, I swear to you I didn't know she was doing this." "What about everything else?" I asked, my voice soft but firm as I looked up from the heartbreaking pile of cards. The way she spoke to me, the accidental exclusions from family events. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I knew about some of it," he confessed, the words costing him dearly. "I told myself she was just being territorial, that she'd warm up to you eventually. I didn't want to start a fight." He finally met my eyes again, his own glistening with unshed tears. It was easier to believe everything was fine. I nodded slowly, absorbing his admission. It wasn't a full pardon, but it was the truth. It was the confession of a man who had chosen the path of least resistance for far too long. "And now?" I prompted gently. Andrew sighed, a heavy rattling sound. "Now everything is falling apart. Vanessa blames me. She blames me for not handling you better, for letting you cut us off financially. She says if I had been a better son, none of this would have happened." The irony was so profound it was almost painful. After all those years of sacrifice, of putting him first, I was still being cast as the villain in their tragedy, the one who had to be handled. "What do you want from me, Andrew?" I asked, my voice clear and direct. I needed to know. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. He stood up and began to pace the small room, his agitation palpable. "I don't expect you to bail us out again. I know I don't have the right to ask that." "No," I agreed quietly. "You don't." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his face a mask of desperation and sorrow. "But I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice finally breaking. "The kids need their grandmother, and I need my mom. Need, not want." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. All these years I was needed for my money, for my free child care, for my unwavering emotional support. I was the giver, the provider, the fixer. But this felt different. This was the need of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline, and for the first time I wasn't sure if I had the strength to pull him to shore, or if I even should. His words hung in the air, heavy with a desperation I had never heard from him before. The need of a child, not for a handout, but for a parent. For a moment, the old instincts rose up in me, the powerful, lifelong urge to soothe his pain, to fix his problems, to make everything okay. I almost reached out, almost told him we would figure it all out together. But I caught myself. The old ways were what had led us to this disaster. A new path was required. I took a breath and changed the subject, my voice steady and businesslike. "I spoke to a lawyer last week." Andrew's head snapped up, his expression shifting from sorrow to alarm. "A lawyer? Why?" "Because I have contributed over $150,000 to that house you live in, Andrew," I stated calmly, ticking off the points on my fingers. I provided the bulk of the down payment, and I have been making your mortgage payments for the last 18 months. That gives me a significant financial interest in the property. He paled, the reality of my words sinking in. You're suing us? No, I said, shaking my head. That was never my intention, but I needed to know where I stood legally. I needed to understand my options. I paused, letting him absorb the information before continuing. The lawyer said I could do one of two things. I could make a legal claim against any proceeds from the sale of the house to recoup my investment. Or, I said, holding his gaze, I could take partial ownership. Partial ownership? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The concept was clearly foreign to him. I could provide the money to stop the foreclosure and bring the mortgage current. I explained carefully. But it wouldn't be a gift or a loan. It would be an investment. In exchange, I would receive a legal, financial stake in the house. My name would be on the deed, right alongside yours and Vanessa's. Actual co-ownership. A flicker of hope ignited in his tired eyes. It was a lifeline. You would do I am considering it, I said, choosing my words with immense care. This was not a promise, but there would be conditions. Strict, non-negotiable conditions. He nodded quickly, ready to agree to anything. What condition? First, I began. I would have regular, unimpeded access to my grandchildren. Set days every week. Holidays. No more games. No more excuses. Of course, he agreed immediately, a look of relief on his face. That was the easy part. Second, I would be treated with respect by everyone in that house. That means no more forgetting to invite me to family events. No more intercepted cards and gifts. I am to be treated as a member of the family, not as an obligation. He nodded again, this time more somberly. He knew this condition was aimed directly at his wife. And third, I said, looking him straight in the eye, my voice dropping slightly but gaining intensity, Vanessa would need to apologize to me. Andrew's face fell. The flicker of hope in his eyes died out, replaced by a familiar look of defeat. Clara, she'll never do that. Not a fake. I'm sorry you feel that way. Apology, I continued, pressing the point. Not a performance you coerce out of her just to get the money. I mean a genuine, sincere acknowledgement of how she has treated me for the last decade, and a promise that it will change. She won't, he whispered, shaking his head. She's too proud. She'd never. Then I guess we have reached an impasse, I said, and the finality in my voice was absolute. I rose from my chair, a silent signal that our conversation was over. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. But I would not. I had built this new spine out of steel, and it would not buckle. Because I will not compromise on my dignity anymore, Andrew, I said, my voice soft but unshakable. Not even for you. He left with Mia a few minutes later, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched them go from my living room window, a deep ache in my heart for the son who was so lost and the granddaughter caught in the crossfire. That night, I sat in my garden as dusk fell, the air cooling around me. Fireflies began to dance among my rose bushes, their tiny intermittent lights a constellation in the gathering dark. I thought about the house, the grandchildren, and the impossibly complicated knot of love and resentment that tied me to my son. I hadn't said no to helping him, but I hadn't said yes, either. I had laid out the price, and it was a price that had nothing to do with money. For the first time in my adult life, I was putting my own emotional well-being first. It felt both terrifying and profoundly right. My phone buzzed on the small patio table beside me. It was a text from Andrew. Can we talk again tomorrow? Just us. I looked at the message, then back at the fireflies. I typed back a simple reply. Yes. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. The price of dignity was high, but I was finally willing to pay it. Andrew arrived at my house the next morning, as promised. He was alone. The first thing I noticed as he stepped into the kitchen was that he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. The bare finger seemed to speak volumes, a silent testament to the earthquake that had shaken his world. Coffee, I offered, trying to keep things normal, whatever normal was for us these days. He nodded, a weary gratitude in his eyes. He followed me into the kitchen, and we sat across from each other at my small oak table, the silence hanging heavy but less hostile between us. Vanessa and I had a huge fight last night, he finally said, staring down into the dark liquid in his mug. A bad one. I wrapped my own hands around my coffee, feeling its warmth seep into my fingers, and waited. I told her what you said, he continued, his voice about the cards she kept from the kids, about how she's treated you all these years. I told her your conditions for helping with the house, the respect and the apology. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed from what I was sure was a lack of sleep. She said she would rather live in a cardboard box than apologize to you. Despite everything, the words still stung, to be so hated, so despised, that a person would choose homelessness over speaking a few words of remorse was a uniquely painful thing to comprehend. I see, I said softly. I don't think she really meant it, Andrew said quickly, a reflexive defense of the woman who was still his wife. She's proud. And she's scared. She's never had to really worry about money before. That's not entirely true though, is it? I said gently. You mentioned yesterday that her parents are struggling too. Andrew looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Yeah, but I didn't know that until last week. Vanessa always made it sound like her parents were doing great, that they were self-made. Unlike, he stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening. Unlike me? I pressed, my heart beginning to pound. Unlike me? Who what? Andrew. He looked ashamed. Unable to meet my eye. Who coasted on Dad's life insurance and played the victim card, he admitted, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. That's what she's been saying for years. I nearly laughed. The sheer unmitigated gall of the lie was breathtaking. For years Vanessa's contempt had been built on a foundation of pure fantasy. Andrew, I said, my voice clear and steady. Your father, Thomas, had a life insurance policy for $25,000. It was just enough to cover the funeral expenses and keep us afloat for about 3 months. After that money was gone, I worked 2 jobs for 10 years to support us. You know that? I know, he said quietly, his face flushed with a deep, painful shame. I remember. Then why would you believe her? He had no answer for that. He just shook his head, a gesture of profound self-reproach. I decided to change the subject, to pull him back from the precipice of his own regret. Where are you staying? I asked. At a motel near work. Well, near where my work used to be. He gave a hollow, mirthless laugh. I told Vanessa I needed some space to think. And the children? They're with her. I'm going to see them this weekend. He hesitated, then looked at me with a hopeful, pleading expression. I was hoping you might come with me. They miss you so much, Mom. My heart leapt at the thought of seeing Mia and Noah, of wrapping my arms around them, but caution held me back. What about Vanessa? She'll be at her yoga class, he explained. It's the one thing she refuses to give up, even with all the money problems. So we would be sneaking around behind her back? The idea didn't sit well with me. It felt like another layer of secrets, another temporary fix. That's not a solution, Andrew. I know, he said, running a hand through his hair in that gesture so reminiscent of his father, that my heart ached. But I don't know what else to do. She won't bend, and you won't bend, and the kids are caught right in the middle. I sighed. He was right about one, the children shouldn't have to suffer because of the conflicts of the adults in their lives. All right, I agreed, my voice reluctant, but firm, but only this once. After this weekend, we need to come up with a real, honest-to-God plan. You, he said, a wave of relief washing over his features. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Mom, about the house. What exactly did the lawyer say? That I have options, I answered carefully. Given how much of my own money I've put into it, I could make a legal claim. Would you? His voice was small, like a little boy's. I mean, I'd understand if you wanted to, but it would. I haven't decided yet, I interrupted gently. But if I do help, it will be as a co-owner, with my name on the deed. It would not be a gift. We are past the point of unconditional handouts, Andrew. He nodded slowly. That makes sense. He opened the door to leave, then paused one last time, turning back to face me fully. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything, for not seeing what was happening right in front of me, for taking your help and you for granted. I walked over to him and put a hand on his arm. I know, I said softly. I have never, for 1 second, doubted that you love me, Andrew. But love without respect isn't enough. It just isn't. After he left, I went into my spare bedroom. Over the years, it had become less of a guest room and more of a storage space for a lifetime of memories. Boxes were stacked against the walls, filled with old photographs, Thomas's collection of history books, and various mementos from a life I barely recognized as my own. It was time to sort through them, to finally decide what to keep and what to let go of. In a large box from the back of the closet, beneath dusty photo albums and stacks of old letters, I found an old sketchbook. Its cardboard cover was soft with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. It had been my one true passion before marriage, before motherhood, before the countless responsibilities of adult life had swallowed my days whole. I had been good. I remembered my high school art teacher, a passionate woman with charcoal smudges always on her cheek, pulling me aside and encouraging me to apply art school. She saw a talent in me that I had long since forgotten, but I had been a practical girl from a practical family. So instead, I had gotten a sensible degree in business administration, met Thomas, and married at 22. I had chosen the sensible path, the expected path, and my art had been packed away in a box. I sat on the floor and flipped through the yellowed pages, a lump forming in my throat. I was stunned by the talent that was so evident in those old, careful drawings. There were portraits of my parents, landscapes from a family vacation, and still lifes rendered in charcoal strokes that were surprisingly confident and deft. Why had I ever stopped? On a sudden, undeniable impulse, I drove to the art supply store downtown. The owner, a woman about my age with kind, crinkling eyes and silver hair tied back in a messy bun, had paint stains on her fingers. She helped me select a new set of drawing pencils, a block of charcoal, and a pad of thick watercolor paper. "Getting back into it?" she asked with a knowing smile, as she rang up my purchases. "After 40 years," I admitted, a nervous flutter in my stomach. "I don't even know if I still can." She smiled warmly and handed me the bag. "It's like riding a bicycle," she said, her voice full of encouragement. "The muscle memory is still there. It's just waiting for you to wake it up." That evening, I set up a small, rickety easel by the living room window and began to sketch the view of my garden. My first strokes were hesitant, awkward, my hand feeling rusty and clumsy from decades of disuse. But gradually, as the setting sun painted the sky in magnificent shades of pink and gold, something deep inside me began to remember. Something woke up. The lines became surer, the shading more confident. It wasn't perfect, but it was. The next day, feeling emboldened, I visited the local community center and saw a flyer for art classes, held 3 times a week. I signed up for watercolor basics immediately, ignoring the familiar voice in my head that whispered I was being foolish. When was the last time I had done something that was entirely for myself? I couldn't remember. By the end of the week, I had attended my first class. The instructor, a gentle man named Arthur with kind eyes and the patience of a saint, had praised my natural sense of composition. "You've done this before," he'd said, with a smile, and I had simply nodded, unable to explain the complex storm of emotions that his simple acknowledgement had triggered inside me. In that class, I met Barbara, a retired nurse and a widow like me, who had a quick wit and a loud, infectious laugh. After class, she invited me to join her and some friends for coffee. To my own surprise, I found myself saying yes. The coffee shop was warm and inviting, filled with the rich, comforting aroma of freshly ground beans. Barbara's friends, Margaret, Patricia, and Linda, welcomed me into their circle without a moment's hesitation. They drew me into their easy conversation about books, local politics, and the upcoming art exhibition at the town gallery. "You should submit something, Clara," Margaret suggested when I mentioned I was just picking up my art again. "The deadline isn't for another month." "Oh no, I couldn't," I protested immediately, feeling my cheeks flush. "I'm just a beginner again." "Honey, we're all beginners again at something," said Patricia, her voice full of wisdom. "That's the beauty of our age. We get to reinvent ourselves. Reinvent. The word lingered in my mind as I drove home that afternoon. It echoed in my thoughts as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, and as I lay awake in bed that night, thinking about the upcoming weekend, about seeing my grandchildren, about the house and Vanessa, and all the tangled, complicated threads of the family that still bound me. Even as I was navigating that old familiar world, I was discovering this new part of myself. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, I felt that I wasn't being defined solely by my roles: mother, grandmother, financial supporter. I was becoming something else, something more. I was becoming myself. A year passed, a year that brought with it changes I never could have imagined on that terrible Saturday, when Vanessa's cruel words had shattered the last of my illusions. It is Mother's Day again. The morning sun streams through my kitchen windows, just as it did a year ago. But this time, instead of arranging flowers, bought in a desperate plea for affection, I am arranging a bouquet of vibrant, joyful tulips that I grew myself, in my own garden. The house smells of cinnamon and sugar. Homemade rolls, a recipe I finally perfected over the winter, are rising in the oven. The doorbell rings, and a genuine, unforced smile spreads across my face. I know exactly who it is. Mia and Noah rush in, their arms outstretched for hugs that I greedily accept. Behind them, Andrew stands holding a wrapped package, a slightly sheepish but happy grin on his face. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he says, kissing my cheek. "Something smells amazing." "Cinnamon rolls," I tell him, accepting the gift. "Your favorite." "Grandma, wait till you see the painting I made at school," Mia says, tugging at my hand. "Dad brought it for you." "I can't wait to see it," I say, and my excitement is completely genuine. At 12 years old, Mia has shown a real, surprising talent for art, a talent I have been delighted to encourage with supplies and shared lessons. As we all settle in the living room, which is now so much brighter with my own watercolor landscapes hanging on the walls, I can't help but marvel at how much has changed. The beautiful colonial house, the one that had been the source of so much strife, had gone into foreclosure after all. Despite my lawyer's assurance that I had a valid and substantial claim on the property, I chose not to pursue it. I had come to understand that some prices were too high, even for justice. Letting it go was the final act of freeing myself. The combination of the extreme financial stress and the ugliness of their exposed lies proved to be too much for their marriage. Andrew and Vanessa separated 2 months after our final confrontation. Vanessa moved to Texas to stay with her sister, taking the children with her. Andrew found a small apartment near his new job, a step down from his previous position in terms of title, but it was steady work at a smaller, more stable tech company. The separation wasn't easy on anyone. The children would call me weekly, their small voices filled with confusion and hurt, and in a surprising turn of events, Vanessa never poisoned them against me. Perhaps losing everything had truly humbled her. Or perhaps she simply lacked the energy for any ongoing warfare. Andrew visited them monthly, and slowly, a new co-parenting routine began to emerge. Then, 6 months ago, Vanessa announced she had met someone new. She wanted to stay in Texas permanently but was willing to let the children spend summers and major holidays with their father. Andrew had been devastated, both by the absolute finality of his marriage ending, and by the prospect of becoming a part-time father, but he had also found a strange new resilience. "Mom," he had called me one night, his voice stronger and more certain than I had heard it in years. "I'm going to ask for full custody." "Are you sure?" I'd asked, concerned about the battle he was about to face. "I'm sure," he'd said with conviction. "Vanessa's not a bad mother, but her life is going in a different direction now. And the kids miss home. They miss their friends, their schools. They miss you." That last part had brought tears to my eyes. To everyone's surprise, Vanessa hadn't fought him. Her new relationship was moving quickly, and her new partner had children of his own. A ready-made family was apparently more appealing than a cross-country custody battle. She agreed to let the children return to live with Andrew, with generous visitation rights for herself. And so, 3 months ago, Mia and Noah had returned home. Andrew found a modest house to rent, not far from my own. And just like that, I is back in their lives. Not as a checkbook or a silent benefactor, but as a grandmother. A real one. The kind who picks them up from school sometimes, who teaches Mia about watercolors, and helps Noah build his ridiculously complex science projects. Open your gift, Mom. Andrew urges now, pulling me from my reflection. I unwrap the package to find a beautifully framed photograph of me with the children, taken at the local art show where one of my paintings had won an honorable mention. We are all beaming at the camera, Mia and Noah pressed tightly against my sides, my arms wrapped around them, our shared happiness captured in that perfect sunlit moment. It's perfect, I whisper, my own tears threatening. Later, while the children are actually helping Andrew with the dishes, another positive change, as he's teaching them responsibility now. I step out onto my porch. The spring air is soft with promise. My garden is a riot of color. Barbara will be picking me up at 3 for our weekly art group, a circle of women who have become my friends, supporting each other through life's endless transitions. My watercolors have improved to the point where a local gallery has agreed to display a few of them in their summer exhibition. It's a small achievement, perhaps, but it fills me with a quiet, solid pride. Inside, I can hear the children laughing and Andrew singing completely off-key to some pop song on the radio. They are the sounds of my family rebuilt on a new foundation of mutual respect, not silent obligation. Last week, I had even received a card from Vanessa. It contained a proper apology years too late, but it acknowledged the hurt she had caused. I appreciated the gesture more than I would have expected, though I felt no desire to resume any kind of relationship. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ashes. The front door opens and Andrew joins me on the porch, handing me a fresh cup of tea. Happy? He asks simply. I look at him, my son, who had nearly lost himself but had managed to find his way back, who was learning, as we all are, that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. Yes, I answer, and it is the truest word I have ever spoken. I'm happy. We sit in comfortable silence as the afternoon sun warms up. In the garden, the children are playing tag, their joyous laughter carrying on the breeze. Inside, my newest painting waits on its easel, half finished. Tomorrow, I'll add more color, more definition. Tomorrow, I will continue creating the life I want. But today, it is more than enough to be here, present, respected, and loved. Not for I could give, but simply for who I am. The price of dignity was high, but oh, how worth it. Clara's incredible journey teaches us a powerful and timeless lesson about the importance of self-respect. It reminds us that true family is not built on financial obligation or one-sided sacrifice, but on a foundation of mutual love and dignity. For years, she gave everything she had, only to learn the painful truth that her kindness was being mistaken for weakness. Her decision to finally say no was not an act of revenge, but a courageous act of self-preservation. It was her way of teaching those she loved that her value could not be measured by a checkbook. This story is a testament to the fact that it's never too late to set boundaries, demand respect, and reinvent your own life, often finding more joy and peace than you ever thought possible. If Clara's story of strength and resilience moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what allows us to continue sharing these important narratives. We are always amazed to see how far these stories travel, so please let us know in the comments which region or country you're watching from today.